Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today's video will be quite the journey, covering topics such as archaeology, culinary arts, and lost historic media. In this video, we will be re-uncovering, if you will, the Ballad of the Prime Rib Boy and its seemingly dark, life-altering impact. But before taking a look at the poem itself, I first want to discuss the history of its discovery. One last note before we get going, I unfortunately won't be able to disclose all of my sources for this video. I was able to obtain leaked info from the British Museum, but I can't risk the nature of the leak to be revealed. As we are all well aware by now, the British Museum is notorious for erasing and concealing artifacts of great historical importance that don't fit with the greater narrative that conforms to people's normacy bias, which is a whole nother rabbit hole of its own. Long story short, a leak like this is possibly a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence, and exposing its source would be like drying up a well that is already drying up. Yeah, I don't know why I couldn't think of a better analogy, but anyway, you can call me B. One more final last thing. Please remember to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment below about what obscure topic you think I should address in a future video. Yes, this is engagement baiting, but engagement is how YouTube knows it should promote my videos. Also remember to share this video with a friend. My goal is to reach 50 subscribers so that I can start doing YouTube live streaming. I think it would be cool to stream a video game while being able to chat with you guys, but I can't until I have at least 50 subscribers. So if you haven't already, please subscribe.
Curator Barnum Brown has found and brought back many dinosaurs. Here is the head of the dreaded Tyrannosaurus, the skeleton of a pteranodon.
The year is 1902. Barnum Brown, hailed as the greatest dinosaur collector of all time, according to AMNH.org, discovers parts of a T-Rex skull fossilized at Hell Creek, Montana. Several years later, he would find a complete T-Rex skeleton. Now, Brown doesn't have anything to do with our story about the Ballad of the Prime Rib Boy, but he serves as an example of the absolutely mind-boggling discoveries made at the times. Archaeologists were popping off big.
I've got my trowel, I'll put it on edge, and I'm just going to scrape dirt into the dustpan. So here I find something, and ultimately, it's just a plain old rock.
Other major discoveries would completely outshine what would later be called the Ballad of the Prime Rib Boy, which I will refer to as the BPB. Considering the entire world would soon enter into global conflict twice, it's not hard to believe that the BPB would be completely forgotten. But I thought you said the poem had such a profound, life-changing impact. How could it possibly be lost to time, you might ask? And to that I say, shut up. I haven't yet thought of a quippy remark that would serve as an explanation and a witty transition to the next subject matter. But if I had to come up with an answer on the spot, I guess I would say, yes, the original discovery of the BBB was considered largely unimportant by the archaeologist who discovered it. But the reason the ballad was lost to time was because of the life-changing impact it had on the original translator. Enter Randall Randallson, who, yes, dear viewer, was an actual person. Side note, I just realized how much I have pretend conversation with you guys as my imaginary interlocutors, which is why I need your help to get 50 subs, so we can interlock live. I don't like how that sounds, actually. So we can chat live on YouTube. Okay, that's objectively a better sentence. Anyways, here's a photo. Here's a totally not AI edited photo of Randallson. Randallson was born in England sometime around the turn of the 20th century. His parents were immigrants from Germany. His father, Rudolf Randallson, worked as a crewman for archaeology dig teams, sort of like a contractor. Growing up, Randall Randallson also wanted to make discoveries in archaeology, but he didn't want to be a crewmate. He wanted to be the head of explorations. Fast forward 45 years and 2 global conflicts later, Randallson did not find the success and fame he had sought for so many years. Early on in his career, he had received funding from various benefactors and philanthropists to serve several explorations and digs, but few found anything worth noting. Randallson, over the same time, earned for himself a bad reputation among his crews and his peers. He was known to be short-tempered and a slave driver, pushing his crewmen to work well past exhaustion while threatening to hold back wages for those who refused to keep up pace. Many would complain that after meeting his rigorous demands that he still would short his workers their promised wages. Randallson himself was a very intimidating man. After serving in and living through 2 world wars, his crew believed that if they failed to meet his expectations, that he would get violent, although there was no account of him making good on any threats of physical harm. He also hired mostly young men out of grade school, probably to add to his intimidation factor, knowing that they wouldn't have much experience in handling his domineering personality. Perhaps his only redeeming trait was that Randallson was no hypocrite. He expected the best from his men, but he expected perfection from himself. Every late-night hike and exhausting dig, Randallson was always noted to be putting in the most effort, as if he was a football coach on the field with his players. After many failed and lackluster exploration, Randallson's pride was on the line. Well into his 50s, he did not make the name for himself that he had hoped for. His benefactors completely cut off funding, and even if he had the money, his body could no longer keep up with the physical demands. So Randallson and his wife moved to London upon taking a job at the British Museum. He was hired as an archiver of sorts. He led a small team keeping records of various artifacts that came in. The museum already had a plethora of items stored up that still needed to be recorded and sorted through. During a normal workday, Randallson was itemizing a collection of unremarkable pots and vases. They were clearly somewhat modern, but according to their tags, they were found in the same area of a discovery of noticeable importance and were collected just in case they had any association with it. Inside one of the sealed pots, Randallson and his team found a small fabric piece of paper with faded text. It seemed to be in French, but none of the small team could read it. The find piqued their interest, but he determined, in order to continue making a dent in the museum's stockpile, that he himself would finish researching while his staff continued cataloging other items. It's important to note the team respected Randallson. By this point in his life, he had mellowed out a bit. He was described as a straight-to-the-point and distant man. But overall, he brought much-needed knowledge and leadership to his team, and ultimately, his team appreciated him. Randallson worked on translating the poem as his team moved on. This point of the account is pretty vague. What we do know is that Randallson was working on uncovering more about the text and the pottery it was found in. And suddenly, one day his team witnessed him packing up his belongings, clearing out his desk, and leaving without saying a word. A classic French exit. This was particularly shocking to the team because they knew that Randallson had ambitions to rise within the staff of the British Museum. Still, because of his uninviting demeanor, no one felt comfortable enough to ask him about his actions or even approach him. One of the staff members, named Victoria Williams, was particularly impacted by his leaving. She would write in her journal, where most of this account is taken from, that him leaving without saying goodbye hurt the team's morale. Because of his knowledge and leadership, they were able to start making meaningful progress in the massive backlog of inventory. He provided the guidance that the young staff needed. Williams, out of all the staff, admired Randallson the most. She wished to be as knowledgeable and headstrong as her boss. Within the coming weeks, the museum would replace Randallson with another man. The staff quickly realized that his replacement was a man without qualifications, as he wasn't able to help with the classification of inventory almost at all. Although he claimed to be a well-traveled curator of all kinds of treasures, he could not add any meaningful input and eventually became distant from the team. He kept to his office, doing paperwork and checking in once in a while. Seeing over the course of about 2 weeks that her new boss was a grifter and missing the opportunity to learn from Randallson, William started to look into the poem that Randallson had last handled before leaving. The rumor was that Randallson must have translated the poem and was so deeply disturbed that he decided to quit on the spot. William's plan was to find where Randallson filed away the poem and read it for herself, and then to go from there. Her journal doesn't describe the process of how she found the poem, plus also, who cares? All we know is that a couple weeks later she got possession of it. It was one of those big envelopes tied with a string. Also inside the envelope was a document written by Randallson, and a smaller envelope with an English translation of the text. William's first inclination was to open the smaller letter and read it, but because of the rumor, she decided to read the document that Randallson had written instead. Her summation was very long, so I'm going to summarize her summary. And this is where the history of the culinary arts comes into the story. Augustus Escoffier is widely credited for revolutionizing the culinary industry. Escoffier, at different points in time, traveled around France working at different restaurants in order to restructure how they approached cooking. One of his employees was a man named John Garnier, who would become known as the prime rib boy. Garnier was a bright and talented young man and became head of roasting meats at one of the places Escoffier led. Overall, Garnier was highly gifted, so much so that his co-workers often sneaked cuts of his roasts and ate them throughout the day. This behavior infuriated Garnier, but seeing his frustrations, his co-workers thought that it was kind of funny and continued to steal his prime rib. Eventually, one of the other cooks wrote a poem and called for the kitchen's attention while handing it to Garnier. It's unknown if the poem was a gag or actual words of advice, but Garnier, in front of the other cooks, began to read the poem out loud. Everyone was in good humor and laughing. Everyone but Garnier, who playing along bowed after reading the poem, laughed a little bit, and went straight back to work. After this incident, Garnier was noticeably more relaxed about the other cooks stealing pieces of his roast. He never offered it to anyone, but he wouldn't get upset anymore about it. He and the rest of the staff all became good friends. Not too long after, Escoffier found out about the meat stealing and put a stop to it. And there you have it, the context of the BPB. William recounts in her journal that the history that Randallson had uncovered seemed odd and kind of trivial. Still not wanting to read it, she determined that speaking with Randallson would unveil more about the poem. So one day, she decided to visit Randallson at his home. She already knew where he lived for some reason. Randallson greeted her warmly, which was kind of odd for him to do so. During the conversation, she asked him why he left, and he responded by apologizing. He said that he got the poem translated by simply asking another staff member at the museum who spoke French to do so for him. After he read the translation, he was so deeply moved, he said that it caused him to do a lot of reflecting, and he realized that he had lived a selfish life up until that point, and that it felt like nothing he had done was worthy. Despite saying some depressing things, William noted how at ease Randallson was, and for the first time, she had seen him smiling. Randallson said that he had started going to church and even got in touch with his estranged adult children. He also stated that he understood why she was upset at him leaving without saying goodbye, noting the irony that it was selfish of him to leave without saying a word, but he also thought it would be selfish to share the poem with them because of the impact it had on his life. He questioned that since the poem completely derailed his life, would it be fair to share it with them if they didn't ask? He never really had friends, so he felt leaving quietly would be his best course of action, as he started his journey to get right with God and leave a meaningful legacy. Happy to see that her former mentor was doing well, the next day, Williams read the poem for herself. She then writes in her journal about her own retroflexion, stating how clearly a change in her life was in order. And that, dear viewer, is the history of the BPB, from its inception to its discovery. So I leave you with the first ever public debut of the Ballad of the Prime Rib Boy, translated to English. Don't worry, there will also be captions for those of you who are chronically online. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you again soon. Peace.
The Ballad of the Prime Rib Boy. Oh, prime rib boy, share your prime rib, kid, for it is not yours and you didn't pay for it. No, too, such are our lives. Though things are not often fair, life is not ours to take, but ours to share.